one, the only, the beyond writer-director, Elegance Bratton.
How about that film we just saw? If I could give away Academy Awards, I'd give one out tonight. So
I'll take it, please.
Listen, there's so many things I want to ask you, so many things I want to talk about. Such an incredible film, so congratulations on really putting together a beautiful piece of art, and a moving piece of, and I'm a big storyteller, so that's what I love. A lot of people may or may not know you shared that you spent 10 years homeless in part of your history to get to this place. I want to know what of that experience impacted the story that you ended up telling here on the screen.
Well, for me, all of it, it's the easiest to answer that question with a story. This is a movie about a young man who's willing to do anything to win back his mother's love, triumph over any adversity to do so, but then ultimately learns how to respect himself, So, but it's also, as an object, a representation of what is possible if you truly believe in yourself and trust yourself, and you don't listen to the people who think the least of you. So when I was a Marine, I had an opportunity to be a filmmaker. That's how I became a filmmaker. But then I got a chance to move back to New York City, where I had to give up being a combat filmmaker, and I had to start my art career. So I called my mother up, I'm on my way back to New York, and I'm gonna be a film director. And she was like, "Oh, you think you're a director? Why don't you go buy a camera and film your little sister's elementary school graduation, And when I went to that graduation, and my sister's classmates had no idea that she had a brother. Her teachers had no idea that my mother had an elder son. And, in that moment, I made a resolution to myself to become a filmmaker, because you're not going to avoid me, So, this movie is very much a triumph over that moment of invisibility and the sharpness and the acuity of that pain. This was a way to make sure that my family, you would know who I belong to, right?
Beautiful, thank you. One of the things that I love about this film is from the very first frame, it grabbed me. It didn't take I had to warm up to it. Literally, the first frame, I was captivated. And now I know that you have a history of documentary filmmaking, and this is your feature film debut, which, again, phenomenal. I'm wondering, how did you work with the actors? All of whom were amazing, by the way. You put together a collection of amazing actors. What did you say to them, or how did you work with them to get such authentic, real performances? I felt as though I could have been watching a documentary. I was seeing the story of real people unfolding in front of me like I was a fly on the wall.
Well, I guess to start off with, I kind of have cinematic dyslexia, in that I don't see a difference between documentary and fiction film. I think that ultimately we are in a process of revealing and uncovering emotional truth. And, in a fiction film, you're blocking it, you're rehearsing it, and then the actor does something that you don't expect, and you're like, oh, snap, let's break all that down and follow the truth, And as a documentarian, I very much take a verite approach. I like to be the fly on the wall, And in that situation, you can film for, Crystal knows, you could film for 10, 12 hours, and then all of a sudden an event presents itself, and you have to chase the truth, So in that regard, I don't really see a difference between documentary and fiction, But to answer your question about how to work with the actors, I can only tell a story. So I remember we were shooting a rifle range scene, and that was probably within the first 3 days of shooting. And another thing is that, we were promised 23 days to shoot the film, but we shot this in Mississippi in the summer, which is hot, biblically hot, and we also shot this during a pandemic, during COVID. So we got shut down because of COVID, and we ended up having to shoot everything you saw in 19 days, right? Wow. So that was phenomenally difficult. And I remember on the first couple of days I was on the rifle range with Jeremy, and I huddle with my actors. I don't really give direction out loud for everyone to hear, right? I'd much rather update the crew rather than have the crew up to speed with the actors' process. I don't want them to ever feel like the camera's waiting for them or anything like that. Yeah. So I had this huddle with Jeremy, and I'm like, I felt like, a eureka moment. Like, yeah, I did it. I'm directing now. Yeah, I got this shit. And then I walk back to Video Village real confident. Then I hear, hey, Elegance. And I'm like, oh, right. It's an ensemble. And I turn around, and all 9 of them had their hands up. And I'm like, oh, shit. I have to have this amount of clarity with every one of these answers, not just Jeremy, And I, have my little huddle with them. Felt like I got it. And okay, I'm in this shit, And then as I'm walking back to Video Village, the cinematographer has their hand up, and the costume designer, and the producers, and I'm like, oh man, not only do I have to have it with the actors, I gotta have it with the crew too.
How about that?
So, working with these actors has been a real transformational experience for me. But all of it begins with, a certain type of generosity of spirit, right? These, my mother passed not too long after this movie got greenlit, and I was very open about that with the performers, and they were kind enough to make space for my rage and space for my grief. And we were able to transform that trust into what you guys just saw.
Beautiful, beautiful. I work with a lot of filmmakers, and I hear a lot of pitches, and I counsel filmmakers on how to make a better pitch, which you want to include things you probably want to avoid. I'm wondering what you said to...
You already heard it.
I want to know what you said. I want the folks here to understand what you said to A24, your funders who said, hey, now I see the vision, I'm on board, let me help you. What was it that pushed them over the edge?
Well, there's a couple answers to that question. I think for the filmmakers out there, it's important to be your own champion, right? And to understand the potency of what you're working with, even as you tell queer stories, right? Because very often, you're in a situation, especially myself as a Black queer man in this business, I'm talking to people who are very different from me, from very different backgrounds that I come from. And what they're concerned about is like, okay, if I'm gonna put this money up, right, who else besides you is gonna see this and understand it, That being said, the most practical advice I can give is to remember that a film like this may seem autobiographical, and it is 100% autobiographical when it comes to the desires, fears, and motivations of our primary character, even if the situation itself is not something I've been through. This film is not a process of recollection. I'm not just remembering what happened and telling people to stand there and act it out. Instead, I'm concerned with the essence of emotional truth. What does it mean, right, for French moment to moment versus what exactly I went through, right? So all that to say, it is best to have your movie broken down into a 10-minute pitch, right? And in that 10 minutes, they have to feel the emotion that you intend for an audience to feel. And if you're able to get that across many, many, many times through many, many, many no's, somebody will recognize what they've witnessed, and you might end up in a position like this.
And you did. All right now. Amazing. So here's the thing. And I tell people, I said, if you're pitching to me and you are not passionate about your project, well, then you shouldn't expect me to get passionate about it if you're not passionate about it.
Well, that's the other thing too, right? What is universal about this Black queer experience, right? Number one, this is a story about mothers, the unbreakable bond between mothers and sons. It's not necessarily about what it means to be Black and gay, but by telling the true story of that unbreakable bond that I had with my mother, I think I'm able to express some of what it might mean to be Black and gay to someone who may not be Black and gay, but especially to those who walk in these shoes. You know, Black queer men, where 1 in 2 of us are expected to be HIV positive in our lifetimes. We're 8 times more likely to be suicidal, 8 times more likely to be homeless. And it was really important in this story to talk about what I'd learned, right? And what I learned was that my intrinsic value as a human being was written in my ability to protect others, right? And granted, I learned that lesson in a hostile space, but, you know, to answer your question, right? These executives, these film folks, they want to understand, what does this mean for the time that we live in? And I think in this time that we live in, you know, it's a very polarized country, more and more polarized by the day, and people are screaming at each other across their differences. And what I learned in the Marine Corps is how to listen to people who were very different from me, and as French does in this film, not to give up on people, right? And to make it about that human connection, to put the institution and the war and all of that into the background, because at the end of the day, we all need each other to survive, even if we disagree. The worst of us is still a human being.
Preach. So I'm interested about the creative partnership with your producers, Chester Elganall and my friend Effie Brown. How was that process?
Well, Chester is my creative partner and my spouse. So, you know.
And can we wave, please?
This is Chester right here.
Thank you, Chester. Oh, thank you, Chester.
So they're a captive audience. They had no choice but to help me. I'm kidding. You know, Chester, right when I had sold the show My House, I was still a student at Tisch Grad Film, and I was at a point where I'd never had that kind of stability before, right? I never had that much money, and it wasn't really that much money, but it was more money than I'd ever had. And I was like, I'm never going to be this stable as I am right now. This is the time to write a feature. So I wrote the feature version of Walk For Me, which premiered in New York at this festival. I wrote the feature version of another movie called Jazz Hands, which is basically New Jack City meets Pretty Woman. But instead of crack cocaine, it's this kid's dick. He realizes his dick is his way out of the ghetto. And I
ain't mad at you.
If you got it like that, you know.
Hey.
And then I wrote The Inspection, and Chester, thankfully, reminded me that I had to tell a story, that my job as a storyteller and your job as storytellers, those of us in the crowd who are storytellers, is to bring the audience to a place they could never, ever go without you. And it needs to be personal, and it needs to be of real spiritual meaning. And, you know, that moment of realizing that I was valuable, even though my mother didn't want me, was the moment that I realized that I had something that any human being could connect to. And that's why this film exists.
Thank God. So these guys went through a lot of physical, what looked like strenuous, at least for me.
Yeah,
strenuous.
They're not pleased with me.
Did they have to go through special training? Did you send them to a boot camp?
Yes. So we shot the movie at Miliota Police Academy in Pearl, Mississippi, right outside of Jackson. And this police academy was built by Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Tuggle, who is very fine. He is daddy. And he's also a Marine. He went to boot camp in Paris Island in 1987, and his base was his kind of memory of what Paris. He reconstructed, as best as he could, he reconstructed his police academy to mimic what he'd experienced at Paris Island, which already kind of gave us a lot of spiritual alignment, because the script is my kind of spiritual memory of my time at Paris and Island. So we had an immediate kind of essential relationship to the location. And then I hired my good girlfriend, Altea Jones, who I only knew as Sergeant Jones. We served together in Hawaii, and I was a private and she was a sergeant. And I never used her first name before she got on my set.
Wow.
So much so.
You only knew her by Sergeant.
I only knew her by Sergeant Jones. That's it. Yes, Sergeant, no Sergeant.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Sergeant, right away, Sergeant. You know, that's how we knew each other.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So when we got on set, I was mispronouncing her name for months.
She didn't correct you?
Because I was the boss.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So she didn't want to. So she didn't want to get fired. So like, I don't want to correct you. And one day she's like, you know, my name is not that. It's this. I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. But all that to say, you know, these actors went through they were integrated into police academy training for 2 weeks. And again, thanks to Chester, I was able to ask for the process I needed with these actors to get them in line. And then with Octavia there, I was like, listen, because she was just a drill instructor before she came to our set. She just finished her last duty of 4 years of duty being a drill instructor. And I said, listen, they might be famous. You might think they're rich. They're not. And, but I want you to put your foot in these actors' asses as if they were just any kid who got off the bus. And she did, and it's so much so that Jeremy ended up coming up to me a couple of days after she met them and was just like, listen, I understand what you're going for, bro, but she doesn't have to be this scary. Because you ask her to be a little less scary? And I was like, no, man, she's got to be scary. So you get it. And then, but fortunately, that kind of environment of the reality of the Marine Corps, it was crazy to me because I'm the director of the film, but like, hey, recruit. I'm like, yes, sir. And I'm like, we're not talking to you. Right. I'm like, oh, okay. So like, that reality kind of created these young actors and forged them into a platoon, just like any other, just like I had experience with my platoon in boot camp.
Amazing, thank you. So I'm just curious, because I'm a little slow sometimes. Should I have taken that there was a scene where Friendship was in a stall with this drill captain, and it seemed like there were carnal relations that happened. Was I to presume that was another dream that he had, like the dream that happened before, or in reality that happened?
Well, there's a dream. I will burst the bubble. That's a dream. It did not really happen.
But it's a great dream, though.
Right.
I love the dream.
Hey,
the dream is beautiful.
We love the dream. But this whole movie, in terms of, French's point of view, Don't Ask, Don't Tell gets its name in the 1990s, but in reality, queer service members were forced to serve in silence for almost 80 years. So we really wanted to establish a visual language that could speak to that experience. So when we're in French's point of view, this is very much a European style film. It's a Claire Denis film. It's like Beau Travail, right? The camera is handheld, it's subjective, contemplative even, right? Trying to express the inner life of this fish out of water, right? This kind of Rocky type of character. But then when we see French in this world, the camera is very much positioned on sticks. The shots are stylized in a vein of like a Full Metal Jacket or a Jarhead, right? So essentially what we're trying to establish is a visual language that could suggest the shaky ground that queer troops stood on for those 80 years of forced silence, right? So in that regard, for me, it was always humorously surprising how much overlap there was between my life as an out gay man before the military and then my life within the military, like these homosocial spaces, right? Right. So from my own experience, that line between fantasy and reality becomes very much blurred because it's blurred by the kind of complication of desire. And for French, he's used to a certain type of transactional exchange between men, right? He doesn't necessarily have a language for admiration. Admiration must mean attraction. And if attraction is there, then there must be some sort of payoff. So his relationship to Rosales becomes fraught in that he's not sure if what he feels for this man is indeed reciprocated or necessarily even true, right? Does he touch my leg because he wants me? Or is he touching my leg to comfort me? So I wanted to kind of exist in that complication as much as possible to kind of hopefully bring the audience into the skin of Ellis French.
And I was there with you. When he put his hand on his leg, I was right there with French, like, well, wait, how do I interpret this? What is this really? Wait a minute. So I was right there with you. So that was very effective. This show is coming out in theaters on November 18th.
Wait, let's all say it together on 3. 1, 2, 3.
November 18th.
Some of y'all didn't know, but now you know. November 18th.
So I'm curious, do you know, or have they told you how many screens it will be premiering in?
We will have, I believe, 6 screens in the United States. We'll have, I think, 3 screens in New York and 3 screens in Los Angeles, with kind of intention that if New York and Los Angeles show up, we'll get more and more screens over the course of the rollout. Jester and I joke a lot that, Whitney Houston when she did that infamous Diane Sawyer interview. She talked about how she wanted Jess Whitney to be a long album cycle. You know what I mean? She didn't want to just have a hit out the gate. She wanted to, long. Right. So we're hoping that with your support, we'll have a nice long rollout for this film, and we'll be able to, eventually reach the middle of the country where, our fate as queer people is very much hanging in the balance. And so it's really important that if you guys can help, it would be great if you could help us drive audience to the theater so that we can get this message out there.
Amen. So not only tell your friends who live here in New York, but your friends who live in California, Los Angeles, to please come out, see the film. And opening weekend is really important to films. So if you can get out that weekend and bring everybody you know or as many people as you can, it would be very, very helpful to the film and this amazing filmmaker. Thank you so much, Elegance. It was brilliant. We love you. Continued success, brother. And congratulations on your announcement.
Thank you so much, y'all. Thank you for coming. Much love. Thank you.